Hi, and good morning, everybody. It's great to be here for yet another episode of Guest Safety Lobby Group. What can I say? The best thing...
Ian, can I just interrupt?
What?
Yeah, I'd just like to say, I'd like to welcome everyone to the Guest Safety Show this morning.
What are you doing?
I'm taking over.
But...
I'd just like to welcome everyone today to the Gary Twain Wright Show and Ian Fox. I'd like to welcome Mike Kuehl from the Nighttime Economy. He's a very good friend of mine. He's been here. And now I should hand you back to Ian.
Well, thanks very much, Gary. I didn't see that in the script. what prompted that? What happened? I never start off with the show. It's the Ian Fox Show, do I? No, well, but now...
It is, because we had the situation last week, I just want to make it very clear. We've just changed the title a little bit.
Now you can see why I always say, and here's Gary, can't you?
Yeah. I've worked with him, I know. So trust me, I know where he's
at. He'll be demanding his own dressing room shortly, a makeup party.
You should have seen his rider. It came with a Lego set and a puppy.
You were just jealous because you didn't get that, Mike. That was all that was about.
I've seen the sustainability clause, mate, and all of that. So
It's all good, right? So as always, well, as it's the Gary, apparently it's now the Gary Twining Show. It's not, folks. In fact, I tell you what, we'll have some engagement there. Who thinks it should be called the Guest Safety Officer Show, which Lobby Group Show, which it is? All those that say yes will obviously get a prize, and then, or it can be Gary and his, whatever, but
and his mate Ian.
Yeah, and his mate Ian. But what we'll do is we'll crack on. So first of all, Gary, can you just quickly introduce yourself? Tell the world what you do.
Well, as you're aware by now, I've been in the industry for 37 years. I'm a consultant. I'm a security officer. I've been a CP officer. I'm a trainer, and I've done virtually everything you can do in the security industry. And if I haven't done it, it hasn't been invented yet. There you go.
And you've blown up, and you learned how to blow things up last week, which is always a great skill.
I certainly did, which was quite fun.
Yeah, there you go, Mike. If the show goes wrong later on today, or at the end night at the summit, the economic summit later on in the week, get Gary in. He'll sort out the insurance claims for you.
I was a bit tentative that they let him on the course, if I'm going to be honest.
So the next thing, obviously, I'm Ian Fox. I'm just Ian Fox, apparently, or AKA Foxy. Not true, ladies. I am not called Foxy. I have never been Foxy. I should be, but I'm not. I just want to make that clear. Right, now, on the show, as previously interrupted, by young Gary there, we have a genuine superstar guru. Again, we've got Michael Kuehl, who is head of the Nighttime Industry Association and also, I believe, the UK Door Supervisors Association. Just exactly how many hats do you wear on any given day, Michael? But please tell us in your own words.
Well, thank you for that. I'm definitely no superstar. I'm just someone trying to do the best for the industry, which has sort of given me so much in the past. But yeah, as you quite rightly said, I'm the chief executive for the Nighttime Industries Association, which is a trade association looking at businesses operating between 6 p.m. and 6 a.m. But also in the last couple of years, I now chair the UK Door Security Association. So multiple hats, multiple sort of focuses. And as you can appreciate, over the last 3 or 4 years have multiple challenges, I think is probably the way to put it. But we're still fighting, we're still pushing through. And, if anything, like I said to you earlier when we were just off, it's been a huge learning curve for me. And I haven't walked into this thinking that I'm going to be any different than anybody else sort of fighting at the front line. So, but thanks for inviting me on, and thank you for, over-egging me, is probably the way I'd say it.
Oh, no, don't worry. We're quite willing to push you off the wall. No problems whatsoever about that. But we get people on who know what they're talking about. It's so important, wasn't it, Gary, that we got guests who could actually contribute and speak with some authority. Gary?
Absolutely. Well, that's the whole idea. It's because we're looking at the side of security, or even the whole nighttime economy, as a professional side. It's not just about, let's use the word loosely again, bouncers and doing their tactics and mucking about. It's about being professional and trying to improve things. Like what you've been doing, Mike, over the last 3 years, improving things and getting the information out there.
Yeah, I mean, it's listen, the biggest thing that we've done, as far as I'm concerned, is create communities. And, whether it be door security companies or whether it be general nighttime economy businesses, the one thing that we've seen is barriers have been dropped. Once people were competitors, they now have a mutual cause, and they've got to stand together. But the biggest thing that we've got out of this is the government need educating. Education doesn't come from government, it comes from an industry to explain to them exactly what we are. And we learned very quickly at the start of it. I remember having a debate over what a nightclub was and whether it sat in culture or whether it sat in business. And the argument was it sits in both, if I'm going to be honest.
Yeah, it definitely does. But just quickly, so you're head of 2 organisations.
Yeah.
One of them employs the other organisation. Technically, is there not any conflict of interest there?
There is to a point, but I think they mutually benefit each other, if I'm going to be honest with you. I think it's important to get the perspectives in terms of the end user as well as the supply. UKDSA members also fit quite rightly within the NTIA fold. But they've got a unique requirement in terms of the Home Office and the way things are set up in terms of licensing. And the only thing that UKDSA would do is obviously build towards a stronger, more professional output, where the NTIA also wants a very similar sort of position, because what we don't want is, the word bouncers. I mean, for the last 3 years, every time we talk about door supervisors, the first thing that comes out on the headline is bouncers. And that's one of the bigger changes that we need. But there's a lot of work still to do, and we're still sort of living in the past in some respects, and that's where the education piece comes in. But it's got to come from all quarters. So that's part of my role. Yes, there are some challenging times, but we're quite open and transparent with those challenges, and we try to deal with them pragmatically so that we can get through. But I've got to take a stance on both sides and work to the mutual benefit of both. So.
It's an incredibly difficult position to be in, because at the end of the day, when I formerly, previously on Ian Fox, when I did, the National Door Watch, the thing that I learned very quickly is you need to be part of a rising tide. All boats have got to be lifted, not just your organisation, but also the people that are employing them. The whole food chain has to lift in order for proper improvements throughout the piece, as it were.
Well, if you talk about security in its
You've
own,
gone deaf.
Oh, can you hear me now? Is that? Yeah. So.
Oh no, this is we're not hearing you, Mike. I'm afraid.
I can hear him loud and clear.
Hello. Have you got me?
No. Have you muted yourself?
No, I'm not on mute.
I haven't muted you.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
This is a great shame.
I can hear Mike. I think it's your end, Ian.
I can't hear you either, Gary, by the way.
I can hear Michael.
Can you hear Michael?
And
yes.
I can hear
perhaps
Gary.
I've muted myself. That'd be brilliant, wouldn't it? What can I say, people?
We need a producer.
Yeah, and this is why it's called Mike Show. As you see,
your speaker is not. Check my speaker.
We can hear you.
For God's sake,
Mike, can you hear him?
Yeah, I can hear everybody. Ian. The only one is Ian can't hear us, I think.
I don't know why I bothered with Michael.
I think
no idea why.
How exciting! Yeah. How exciting! You don't get this everywhere.
So it's his hearing aid, Mike. Look at that. Is this 1, 2, 1, 2?
What the hell is going on here?
I'm working with unprofessionals. I really am, Mike. We're trying to be a professional show, and this is it.
I thought earpieces were the mainstay of the industry.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. You can hear me. That's there. Don't know what's going on.
Anyway, so where were we, Mike?
Brilliant. You two have a chat, because I'll be able to hear this. You ask lots of questions. In fact, I've got a few things. I'll start one off. Mike, can you tell us, while I sort my head thing, what's your vision for the door supervisors stroke guest safety officers? And Gary, perhaps you could impress on Michael why we should call them guest safety officers. I'll go and sort this out.
Do you want to impress first?
Go on, impress us. We talk, as you said, we talk about losing the word nightclub bouncer. It's, as you say, any papers you see them out there. Even as I say, these small people, I think, like working the doors, they're one of the worst people. They're talking about trying to improve the industry, and they're throwing the word bouncer out every week or every session they're throwing out. So yeah, I mean, it's a guest safety officer. We're looking at it as the point of view. We're the first point of contact, as you're aware. When everyone comes in, you and me have stood together on the door, so we are always the first point of contact. Being the first point of contact is we meet and greet, we look after people, and we want people to have a good time, and that's what the whole thing's about. Having people a good time, knowing they can come to a venue, an event, and it be safe. And it's not about, the good old days where out you go, love, or him, and then you throw them out the door. It's not about that anymore. As you said, the education and the training has got to be a lot better than what it is.
I agree with you. I think we do need to change the narrative around it. No different than needs to change the nighttime economy narrative of risk. We need to start celebrating the positives of the entire industry, whether we're a nightclub or whether we're a security firm supplying door security. The challenge that you have all along with this is it's based on the foundations and the way that we're approached. Some of that comes from the authority, some of it comes from the regulator, licensing, home office. When you talk about security, the challenge that you have at the moment is, being quite frank, is the infrastructure for security is, in my opinion, broken. I think there are a lot of issues around ad hoc companies that are not upholding the professionalism of the private security sector, particularly the door security sector. I think there are some issues with the quality of door security operatives that are coming through. I think that from a licensing perspective, we have a very convoluted licensing regime that really isn't at present fit for purpose and doesn't consider the real market requirements in terms of people walking into the industry. I'll give you an example. To have a training scheme from the SIA that takes 4.5 days, 5 days, and then you have to do a first aid course prior. If you're a part-time member of security and you're topping up your money leading towards Christmas, then, are you going to take a week off work to retrain? Are you going to, or enter into the sector? So I think there are lots of questions with regard to the current market. I think there are lots of questions with regard to the activity of the regulator. And I think that the PSA, or the Private Security Act, needs a complete overhaul. I think the licensing regime as it sits at the moment doesn't allow us to understand when we have challenges with resource, which we've seen in the last sort of couple of years where it's been a real challenge. And when we've gone to the SIA, they've quoted figures which don't account for active, inactive badges, people abroad. So, I've sat in home office meetings with the SIA and they've said, right, we've got 249,000 door security badges in circulation. And I said, well, how many are active? We don't know. How many are abroad? We don't know. So I said, my wife's got a door security badge. She hasn't worked on the door for 9 years. I said, so the reality is that's inaccurate. How can we act or understand what's going on at the front line? They said, well, we've got multiple amounts of badges being applied for. I said, you've also got multiple amounts of people that are required on home bargains front door squirting sanitizer into people's hands. So the requirement in the public domain has been greater because of the pandemic. I said, but what you're now finding is that the quality, the drive-through, things like DWP are causing issues on the front door because people don't want to work with poor quality operatives who are going to probably compromise their safety long term. So there's a lot of issues out there that need to be addressed, and it starts with the Foundation Private Security Act and also goes through the regulator and Home Office to remedy those positions. So a lot of work to do out there, without a doubt, but I do think it's got to start with a change in narrative. But that foundation legislation has to change, because things like voluntary, approved contractor schemes are pointless. What's the point of having a voluntary accreditation scheme? So we'll join up if we want, but in the meantime, we've got something like 960 approved contractor people on the books in terms of the SIA, and we've grown to nearly 4,000 security companies across the country. So the void is the fact the likes of HMRC and things don't even know half of those operators are operating, leading into a protect duty situation. I mean, talk about vulnerability. Anyway, sorry, rant over.
No, it's not a rant. I totally agree. And funnily, it's funny that you should. Me and Gary were having a good old set too, because I'm personally in favour of business licensing. I'm certainly in favour of monitored recommendation 8. I'm certainly in favour of some of the things that you've just discussed and mentioned that need to be sorted out in order to professionalise the security industry. But I also think one of the problems is that we see things from a bubble, the security bubble, and what our own little, the nighttime economy, there's door supervisors, etc., etc. But I remember I was at the department of, the director of the CBI. I was with him a few years ago, and he said that security is a big industry, but in the great scope of things, it's only a small part of the GDP of the UK, and it needs to understand that security encompasses all of those other parts. That it's not just here, and I think business licensing needs to expand to cover that, to draw in the cash. Sorry.
I think the interesting part is, and it all goes back to one thing: this is public safety.
Yeah,
frontline protection. We have to, and that's really when you speak to anyone within the Home Office, it's the public protection team that you would speak to and sit with.
Yeah.
So the reality is irrelevant of the size of the industry, the fact that it's public protection driven should give it the hierarchy it deserves.
Yeah.
It also draws back to the fact that we've just seen NHS staff have legislation passed which protects them from abuse or issues and have the same standing as assaulting a police officer. You've got to have a consideration around protecting the staff that are standing on the front line, protecting people from counter-terror and etc. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done to not only protect and create stronger environments for people to work within, but also create more robust environments for them to deliver that sort of service. And we talk about value. The value of the security sector is immense in terms of public protection, but that doesn't convert into rates in many respects. It's not the way it's looked at. So there are some real big challenges out there that need to be overcome, and it's got to start from the Home Office and work its way out. Start with the legislation, start with the restructuring of the likes of business licensing, the likes of the current licensing regime, whether it needs to be broken down further, whether there needs to be a market responsive position so that we understand the likelihood of or the predominance of people engaging in the security sector and where they come from, and then setting up these schemes to accommodate for them so accessibility is much stronger, particularly women within the security sector, and the focus on safeguarding and that side of things. So there's a lot of work still to be done. We're constantly calling with regard to things like LGBTQ plus, and we have massive issues that we deal with where security from general public environments, then go and work in LGBTQ environments and can't correlate the differences or understand where those changes are. And it's not easy for people, I understand, but there are training mechanisms that need to be in place for it. So, there's a lot of work that needs to be done out there within the security sector, not only as an industry, but also, for the supplier out there to understand the value, the end user, as that's where the NTIA side comes in.
We talk about the end user as well. I mean, I always find the end user or the operator, the venue operators, whatever you say, that they always look as a security as a necessary evil. They don't really want us there, but they've got to have us there, i.e. because of licensing or because of insurance, things like that. And as you say, the end user sometimes doesn't appreciate what they've got there.
No, and I mean, I'll throw it as a perspective. Sadly, it's not seen as a cash generator. That's the reality. So when you start talking about costs which are not cash generation orientated, but then again, you draw back to the fact that the license is king. So, without a license, without security protecting and safeguarding your position in terms of public safety, in terms of CT, in terms of, antisocial behavior, keeping the crap out and the good in, then, there is a value to it. But we haven't struck a line where the end user really understands that value in tangible terms.
But I think, Mike, it depends what you class as the end user here. I look at it, you look at the research for the nighttime economy, users of in particular, and people don't go into town. And it's not just, this isn't a pandemic thing or a now thing. This is research that goes back. I remember listening to Alistair Turnham, who I think speaking at the conference years ago, talking about the impact of safety on and the impact it has on businesses. So it's not a cost. Employing the correct amount of security to keep your customers safe will actually be it's an investment. It's not a cost.
Absolutely. But in a cost inflation crisis, people will look at those things and sadly, for right or wrong, and I'm not one to sit in on the fence on this one. I understand the importance of security, but there are other elements to that. I mean, I don't know if you've heard of something called the donut effect.
Yeah.
Where obviously people, not only for safety reasons, for consumer mobility purposes, stay within their resonating sort of suburb areas.
Yeah.
What we've seen is a stronger build of licensed premises within those areas, and cities, particularly city centres, continue to struggle with spaces and in shops, etc., etc. So there are a lot of things that sort of impact and affect that, and without a doubt, security plays a huge part in safeguarding. But I do think that there is a real challenge with understanding the value, because they're not a cash generator. They're not like a member of bar staff will generate £1,000 worth of bar sales. It's actually working through a tangible value in terms of a balance sheet or a profit and loss statement, which is very, very difficult to do, as you can imagine.
Well, yes, but would you not? And I don't know what you. Having been in the security industry, and sadly been alive for 65 years, I've been going out since I was 17 and thoroughly enjoying myself, I must say. But you've got to appreciate that there is a cost to getting those people in, or the value. You've got to get them into the centre, and the only way you do that is by offering good content. Yeah. Offering something people want. Nobody would be interested in the NTIA if it wasn't offering something of value. And finally, just on that, I just think that we've got to appreciate that and stop talking about what is bad and move on to what's good, because we do so much as the nighttime economy and in various reasons. Various places.
Without a doubt. I mean, we've got some particular challenges at the moment, which we understand. One is it's too expensive to operate a business in the centre of a city.
Yeah.
That's simple terms. That's the inflationary impact. That's rents and landlords getting greedy because they're looking at comparable rents. The other side of things is, there is a big issue with independence at the moment. We've seen a 13% contraction in independent businesses and only a 3% contraction in managed businesses.
Yeah.
So we can quite clearly see that independents are struggling. What we are seeing, which is almost like a cannibalization, is managed businesses or corporates or conglomerates buying up those creative sort of high street businesses. And what we're starting to lose is the character and that versatility in the high street that sort of sets the tone, and the indifference between a standard nightclub which is part of a group and an independent nightclub that might be putting something bespoke on. So it absolutely reinforces your position in terms of the cost, but also the managed environments having a stronger cash fluidity position, that they're able to pivot and buy some of these.
Not again. No.
Keep going, Mike. No,
I
I agree with you on that point. At all. I mean, we're losing independence too quickly nowadays, which is a shame. And it's independence which create the atmosphere.
Yeah. No.
Best show ever.
Sorry. I was just focused on Ian losing it and pulling his computer apart. Look, for me, we have got a 3 to 5 year recovery process. It depends on what happens on the 15th of March in terms of the budget, and whether they're going to give us some headroom to be able to survive moving forward. It's very, very difficult at the moment to talk about positive pieces. What we are seeing is that, we're seeing that this 40% increase in costs and about a 15% downturn in customers having disposable income to come out on us. There is definitely a void between the youngsters and that sort of mid-age customer that potentially has a greater responsibility or career path journey that's just starting out, and those more discerning sort of people coming out and enjoying a night out with more disposable income. So I think there's a lot of work. There's a lot of work going on at the moment, pivoting with activity and different types of environments that people are playing with. But overall, the actual cost of trading is what's squeezing everybody. And I think the other thing you've got to remember is it's that difference between direct and indirect cost. So, when your energy bill lands on your doorstep, you know what you're paying. But the reality is, if you go to Heineken or BOC or anything like that, they will include that increased cost of energy, but they won't come down as quick as they go up.
That's right.
And it's 90% of your trading cost. So when you consider that, lowering your kilowatt hour in terms of this relief scheme is only going to really impact about, the best part of 10% of your trading costs. The rest of it is going to be like the fuel courts, that 5p drop. We didn't see a fuel courts for weeks, if not months. And they're all saying, well, it takes a while because we buy bulk. And you're like, right, okay, that's great. But when's your bulk going to run out? It's like, well, the quicker you buy, the quicker it runs out, the quicker the price comes down. And that's the conversations you're having with gas and oil providers in terms of that kilowatt hour position and that trade. So not easy.
Carry on without me.
It's not, but as I say, the end user, again, is trying to justify the end user the price of security. I mean, if we look at when I started security 37 years ago, we were on something like, well, I was on about £15 an hour, and that was 37 years ago. If we look at the way the inflation's gone through that and the introduction to the SIA and everything, I remember when the SIA was going to come in, everyone goes, yeah, we'll be on £25 an hour, blah, blah, blah. It was never going to happen. You could see that wasn't going to happen. But the thing about it is now we are 37 years later, and the companies are only paying 10s, 14s, maybe 15s max. And that's in 37 years. But your nighttime economy security officer back then, or let's use the word bounce again, they were there to bounce. That's why they were paid more money to bounce people out and to look after the venue and look after the site. Now, as we're aware, times have changed. Money's got different, but the people whose wages have come up is your night watchman, it's just corporate security and what have you. But the end users, all the nightclubs, they were paying good money back then, 37 years ago. Now they're looking at it going, well, we can't do that, and they will look for the cheapest option, which, I understand they've got budgets and bits and pieces, but the cheapest option doesn't buy you the better security company. You know,
No, and I'm 100% with you. I mean, we have, you know, many challenges, things like right to work issues. And I'm sure you've faced it. I mean, I heard a story the other week of a a licensed member of security turning up at a venue with his 14-year-old son. And when he was asked what his 14-year-old son was there for, he said, because I need him to interpret. And when you've got to ask the question, what course was he doing to start with? Where's his right to work position? And it's, you know, there is a continuation of gaps that seem to be coming through. And, you know, the quality is getting worse, although the training that was supposed to be implemented was supposed to be about focusing on lifting the quality. So there is something missing. And I think part of that is the accessibility. There's no market consideration in terms of access and the type of people that come into this industry. And I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done on the suppliers coming in. But I mean, I think this is a multi-pronged approach. This is not just about Home Office, SIA. It's also about the industry itself, self-regulating in many respects. But it's also the end user in whatever guise, having a truer understanding of the consideration, maybe that tangible value, or maybe the infrastructure that is a focus to put in place by the regulator in the Home Office then identifies either a grading system or a way of creating value through development and vocational training. The question is, I mean, we're being asked at the moment to put something together so that we can propose to the SIA in terms of restructuring the license system. And, you know, do we go back to a basic license and then people are graded to vocational training skill sets? So in other words, PIT training to, you know, extended first aid training or emergency response training and, you know, CT training, and we build a portfolio so that you've actually got people that are vocationally developed and feel like they've got a commitment. I mean, we've spoke about this, Gary, many a time. I mean,
absolutely
chewing the fat, but at some point someone's got to break the mold and consider how we develop, because, you know, security guarding is a certain skill set, you know, looking at
totally different though, Michael. It's totally different.
Very much so. But it takes that training as well. I mean, we can't ignore when we talk about door security, that's a certain type of training. When we talk about security guarding, that's a certain type of training. But what we're saying is if you do base security and then you decide, almost like you're a doctor and you decide to go into pediatrics or orthopedics, or you can go that direction of travel and build a vocational portfolio, is that the way to do it? I'm not saying it's the answer, but what I'm saying is it then builds on value in terms of end user and value in terms of industry operatives.
I think... Sorry, guys. I apologise for saying like that. I think, as Gary said earlier, that he wanted it to be the Gary Twining show. I think he's done my ears in, obviously. But getting away from that is, I think, it's really important that when we look at the training, it's actually focused on the area, as you say. I think we've got to split security completely and utterly away from those that work in what I class as customer-facing roles, i.e., if you're working in retail, when you work in retail in a mall, you know, in a shopping mall, when you work in front of a pub, when you work at a festival, because it's a completely different skill set. It has completely different requirements. And there was one thing, and I know you probably covered it, I wanted to ask, you know, because the nighttime economy is effectively policed by between 10 and 20 to 1 on any given night by, you know, guest safety officers, licensed or otherwise. But anyway,
listen, you know as well as I do, the first time we were asked to use high-vis jackets on the front door, you knew that the optical illusion was very good. It was about, oh, look, there's lots of police down there, maybe I won't play up. And that was the optical illusion. You know, there was a very clear strategy around it. We understood what it was. We could all see it coming. But like you say, I mean, at some point we've got to give back to the industry and, you know, give back to the operatives and create some structure. I mean, we've been looking at the way that Australia do it. We've been looking at the way that Southern Ireland do it. And there are some issues with Southern Ireland. The premise of what they're trying to achieve makes sense.
Yeah.
Similar to Australia. But, you know, we've been working with some people who already work within those territories, and they're feeding back on the issues that they face. I mean, prime example is there in Southern Ireland, there is I think it's either a 16 euros per hour sort of baseline. And now they're being taken to court over that 16 euros because it's a working practice thing. So, you know, these are all these things that need to be considered. But I think the industry's got to play a part in that level as well. The reason they've come down is because of the competitive nature of our sector. And the fact is the cheaper the labour, the more they're going to offer. And the end user, you know, potentially not using, but that's where licensing comes in as well. So I think there are answers, but we're just not moving quick enough to resolve them.
Do you think that this is one of the things that frustrates me? And you know, you and I, we don't talk, but I get on my keyboard and warrior away, you know, and go, Michael, why aren't you doing this, etc., etc. Is that we've got to start adopting and taking control of our own destiny. I don't like that Brexit, you know, take back control sort of thing, but it's a fact. We as an industry, you know, either whether it's a nighttime economy, festivals, etc., we, you know, or as guest safety officers, we have an opportunity to establish. We don't have to wait for government. We can do it ourselves because government don't want to touch anything. They're quite happy for us to do anything. So where's you know, what I'm looking for is the inspiration. Where are we going? Yes. Here we go.
And I'm 100% with you. We've got as an industry, we can't just look to the Home Office and SIA to drive the agenda. We've got to do it as well. And we've got to because we're an active part of the problem. You know, whether we talk about competition, whether we talk about rates, whether we talk about operatives, you know, we're an active part of the problem. The reality is we are our own worst enemy as a sector. So you have got some very good operators within the sector, which we're aware of.
Yeah.
You've got the operators who do well, haven't got so much of the infrastructure, but they operate, you know, in a decent manner. And then you've got the ones that, you know, just don't really have the professional standards that we would like to see. So you've got to ask the question as an industry, how do we start to change that? Is it a matter of us creating a trade organization that starts to drive standards? Is it about mentoring? Is it about partnering up with people and developing best practice models? Is that the start of what we do? But you've also got to then go back to the fundamentals of how things work. And at some point, it's got to be addressed through legislation. It's got to be addressed through the regulatory body. So I think without a doubt, and I agree with you, the industry has got to play a massive part in it, and they are going to have to be the driver. But I think they can't do it without the other components. It's not as straightforward as that. So I think there are some revelations that we can sort of push in terms of the industry, but, you know, without some reinforced position in terms of the legislative framework and the regulatory framework, I think, you know, it only takes one person to burst out of the fence, as it were, for things to fall down. And that's an experience I've had personally for some time now.
Everybody who's worked in the industry and has run done a bit of promoting, did this bits of pieces, knows exactly what you're talking about. Somebody will come along, do it cheaper. You know, we're a disruptor, they'll say, or whatever. And you can disrupt in a non-public safety environment, as far as I'm concerned. Happy days. Let's get some more tech in. Let's do this, that, and the other. But isn't it? Is one for you. Why haven't we got our own awarding organisation? And therefore, if we did that, then what we say is, if you go through our awarding organisation, we recognise you with our career path, which we've structured and put together. blah, blah, blah. Anybody who then operates outside of that, well, if anything goes wrong, health and safety, as we saw in the Manchester arena, you know, that was the underpinning factor that was used throughout by Sir John Saunders. So, and how health and safety is now being seen as, the guidance is now not being seen as guidance, is it? It's now being interpreted as law. You know, so if you're not with us, if you've not gone to the recommended Michael Kell NTIA, yeah, then what are you doing? Sorry.
And I think one of the key things that we've been looking at with the UKDSA is exactly that. The challenge that you have, as you know, quite rightly say, we've got a lot of people who, for the better good, want the best for our industry.
Yeah.
But you've also got a lot of people out there that see it as a cash cow.
Yeah.
And this is where you have the challenge, is having a consistent collective position. Consistent's not too difficult to achieve. Collective in terms of all parts is where the challenge lies. And without having a mandated draw or a position to draw people in, that's where so in other words, we need to create almost a go-to, which I agree with where you're coming from.
Yeah.
But how do we do it? If we can't get everyone involved in it, that's when you get that issue in terms of a very weak border in terms of the sort of fencing. And it only takes those disruptors that start leading people off, because the first people to say is, listen, it's affecting my business, I need to deal with it. And that's something that, so it's without a doubt, Ian, I agree that I would love to be in a position and have the confidence to say that we can get the sector together and agree. Gary, you'll know this better than anyone. How hard is it to get everyone to agree? We went through I mean, my wife was a massive part of a merger where Bridgegate, LeisureSec, etc., came together to do that. And there was still, you know, off the back of that, someone, you know, with the greatest of love, screwed someone over. And it's those sort of things that you have the challenges. I don't want to work with him because it's, you know, I have it with DJs as well as I have it with security companies. So, you know, I don't want to play with that person because their sustainability position disagrees with where I am. And, you know, I have more infighting over, well, they don't do it right. And then the other will say, well, you don't do it right. And it's getting that mutual position amongst people who probably spend more time and effort bitching about it than they actually do considering the wider impacts of their issues between each other.
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, we have got a regulator. The SIA is a regulator. As you said, legislation is really out of date. What's it now, 22 years old? Am I right? Is it 2001 came out, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's over 20 years old, which is out of date because times have changed. But as a regulator, the regulator doesn't speak, well, it speaks to everybody, but doesn't listen. It hears, but doesn't listen. There you go. And it's got these people, these imaginary people he speaks to. You can never find out who these, it won't be transparent about the people it speaks to. Whenever I speak to the regulator, yeah, we've got people, police officers, we've got people from the army, we've got people from prison services advising us. Well, they're different organisations, absolutely completely different organisations. Security is a different remit altogether. They're similar, and the most similar thing is, yes, a police officer is probably the most similar to a security officer. Prison officer, completely different. Soldier, ex-military, absolutely different ball game altogether. But having the regulator should be starting to pull its finger out of his bottom and start doing something about it. But it doesn't. It falls back in its legislation, and it doesn't want to do this, wants to do that. And if it does start doing stuff, it doesn't do it properly. It does it half-hearted, i.e., like you said, you want to bring first aid into the game. They didn't say, okay, so everyone do a first aid at work. They've done emergency first aid one day. Let's keep it simple and stupid. And if the regulator still thinks we're simple and stupid, that's what we're getting out there. As you said, you've got a gentleman rocks up who can't even speak English. So where did he get his license from? And that's still happening out there. 5-day course, it's not a bad course, but you know, you can't be a soldier. I keep saying this, you can't be a soldier within 5 days. You can't be a police officer in 5 days. We didn't get to our positions in 5 days. You know, me and you have stood on the door together, Michael. You know, all this has led to where we are now. So, you know, at the end of the day, why can't the regulator, pull its socks up and start making positive steps towards this rather than it titters. It doesn't really Or maybe it's listening but not hearing.
And I agree with you. I mean, look, I met with Michelle Russell just before Christmas. I meet with the ministers and directors at the Home Office, and I beat the same drum in terms of where they are. I think the challenge that they have is the Private Security Act has really rendered them toothless, apart from enforcement and administration, if I'm going to be honest. I think the challenge that you have is long term, their future has been quite tentative, given the fact that 2 years ago or 3 years ago now, they were reviewed as a regulatory body and whether they were a requirement in terms of their cost base and their generation of sustainability. And I think that is probably something that would be reassessed in the ongoing future. I think there is a concern that without the Private Security Act changes, the regulator will still continue with a very loose approach to this. And realistically, you've got to question how much they do outside of administration, because the enforcement is not as effective. We have worked with the SIA and HMRC in terms of their legislation around the agency side of things, and the way that companies that are not HMRC registered and are taking money and then not declaring their tax and not above board, there is a cycle which you will see the end user or the business, like the club or the bar, who will forfeit their position in taxation because of the way that they manage themselves. And then that draws back to the fact that they've got to really look at taking on and doing the due diligence in terms of cash fluidity and tax position and registration, which is important. But I mean, the meetings I've had with HMRC, I mean, they're missing over 3,000 businesses that they don't know where they are or what they do. There's no trackable content. So, you know, your argument is always based on public safety for me. That's why I always say that when you go back to if we're going to have a regulator, then give them the tools to do the job. You know, the Home Office need to drive that. We can lobby till the cows come home. We can then start setting the standards, but if they're not recognised, then that's when the industry doesn't buy in as heavily. But, you know, without a doubt, at the moment, I think their biggest role is administration. And do we need a regulator that size to administer? Given the fact that they haven't really got the resource to enforce either. It's a very limited enforcement position.
I think the point that you make there, Mike, is absolutely right. They are a toothless tiger, funnily enough. Often a tail. One of the things that I say when I write about this particular issue is the issue of enforcement isn't an issue, or shouldn't be one. It's the desire, the lack of desire. The SIA do possess the tools to do the job. It is within their remit to withdraw the authority to deliver their programs, and they don't. It's as simple as that. There have been clear cases where, what can I say, malfeasance, fraud, all sorts of things take place. It is the responsibility of the awarding organisation to take the necessary action with their training providers, and they don't.
Yeah.
And that is overlooked because they know the SIA are not going to enforce their key, their crucial enforce, because if they did that, it would be a game changer for those organizations. But what is it, Gary, we said about I think it's about a £2 or £3 million a quarter business or something, with licensing certification. It's a big business.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, listen, scrutiny needs to be presented not only at the point of training, at the point of supply, and also at the point of the individual officer. My conversations around black market security companies has been ongoing for over a year. Yeah. We talked about operations that we were going to go out and do stings. Interestingly enough, they went and did all the ACS companies that they already knew were above board because they'd already done the thing. So and then anyone that was found, as you know, they're driving towards PAYE from UTR. They then all came back and found people under UTR, but did nothing to them, just said that they should be on PAYE because they're gainfully employed. So, the reality is that message goes around like wildfire.
Yeah.
They're not really going to do a lot, are they? What can they do? And I mean, the UTR PAYE argument is a long-standing thing because we're trying to change a behavior that's been around for absolutely years. What's the difference between a plumber and a member of security? As long as they're paying their tax, how they are paid is really. But I do understand the gainfully employed position, but there are plenty out there that can turn down work. There are some that are regular, as you know, but Gary, you'll know more than best that, contracts move, things change, and that's gainfully employed is being someone who obviously works in an environment consistently under the same sort of environmental sort of pressures and direction. I just think at the moment it's just not very well thought, and it's just not very market intelligent is what you're going to say. What are they missing is market intelligence. What they're not listening to is the industry and the shortcomings. What they're doing is making broad brush approaches, and I do question whether that comes from the SG environments rather than the DS environments, because SG is a lot easier. It's almost, I'll tell you how it feels and you'll understand this. It's like talking about the core of hospitality in pubs, bars, restaurants and hotels and thinking that £6,000 is going to go anywhere for a nightclub or a venue of any capacity. It's almost like they tried to broad brush it and fold everything under one title. DS is not that route, and it's not an SG environment. PAYE is not a naturally resonating way of being paid within those, which we've known for many decades, not just years. So I think the market intelligence piece is a challenge, not only for HMRC, but also for the regulator and Home Office.
Do you think that what the nighttime economy and basically, the festival, event, hospitality, leisure sector has got to realise is that it's bloated, and it has been bloated for a long, long time. And we're going to see a natural fallout and shakeout that happens, whether you like capitalism or not. That's an inevitability, and but that is actually an opportunity. With every fall, there is an opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, Ian, within my position, it's very difficult to businesses are going to close. I'm not going to sit here and pretend for 1 minute. My job is to try and sustain an industry at the best level it can be in terms of the economic position, so that we can grow and invest and all the other considerations that come along with the nighttime economy. At points through a 3-year cycle, as we talk about clubs, after 3 years, you have to refurbish. Know that there is a cycle. I think the challenge that we have at the moment is the distinctly unnatural method of contraction is a bit that we're uncomfortable with. So when you talk about industrial action and consumer mobility, while I completely understand that people have a right to strike, do they have a right to place their industry ahead of ours in terms of priority, given the impacts that directly relate to us and our consumer mobility, cost inflation, and the way that we've been supported, given that we're at the sharpest end, whether we talk about pandemic or inflationary position, has been a huge challenge for us. And I think the other thing is that undervaluing of the traction and the input in terms of community culture and city centres and high streets in terms of their understanding of value has been a real concern, because they've been quite happy to allow our industry to drop off somewhat, bearing in mind that nighttime economy is bigger than automotive, beauty, fashion, etc., and all of which are not being impacted. So, and retail, again, are being protected somewhat. So, we sit back and we say 300 million nightlife visitors per year cannot be ignored. But when you go on Visit Britain only 6 out of the 25 key cities across the country mention nightlife, music, or culture. If we were treated like castles and galleries, then we'd be laughing,
Well, yeah.
So
it is a thought, and I think Gary think I think we should. I personally think we should make the supermarkets pay. I'm with Tim Martin on this. Tax disparity needs to be sorted out, and that supermarkets need to start paying their share of the costs of regulation and the costs that it adds on the nighttime economy. In terms of policing, all these things, they should be paying for our training. They should pay for our licenses. They make, what was it, £630 million was Sainsbury's, and about £1.2 billion was Tesco's. And the SIA cost 30 million. Cheap by comparison.
Tax disparity is an ongoing issue. We know that for preloading. We know that they've made their money while everyone was closed.
Yeah.
Off sales were huge. If you talk to suppliers, things like Campari and others, they dropped like 1-2% of their total sales. So they didn't lose the impact of on sales. But there is another disparity, I believe, and that's around approach, accountability, and attitude towards nighttime economy. I think there is a risk narrative when you talk about approaching licenses. The first data that's presented in a licensing committee is crime stats.
Yeah.
Talk about quality impact assessment. They don't talk about community, economic, cultural impact. They never gain a quantifiable position about anything other than the crime impacts within the area. And the other thing that I think is really important is the disparity in approach around licensing issues. The first point of call of a nightclub, if there is an issue in it, if someone goes in, they've taken drugs outside, they die inside, sadly, the first thing they do is close. They don't do that in a hotel. If someone goes in their room and passes away, they don't do it in a supermarket. So there is a clear disparity in terms of the approach. There's a disparity in terms of taxation. And it is a risk narrative. That's what's really very harmful. So when we talk about harm reduction, everything's on the back foot of trying to remedy a safety issue. We never talk about celebrating. We never talk about anything positive.
Yeah.
So our frustration, and one of the big things that we're looking at narration-wise, is to change the data presence for things like licensing committees. We're talking about committees doing training. We're talking about licensing officers sitting through and understanding culture as well as our industry, rather than making it. I gave this example to a minister. He said, well, what do you mean? And I said, you can't be a Formula One director without understanding Formula One racing. So why do you expect police officers to enforce against an industry they have no knowledge of? So it's something that's got to happen, or otherwise we are going to continue to be placed in this environment.
I think you're absolutely right. I do think you're right. Gary?
No, I totally agree with you. I like the point you're correct. Whenever you go to a licensing meeting, the first thing is, they bring up the crime stats. And as you said, the first thing they do, if something goes wrong in your nightclub, get rid of the security company, get rid of the DPS, close down, and that's it. And then they don't work on the bigger picture. They've got too many people in this industry who are not fit for purpose, who haven't done the job. They don't understand the nighttime economy. They don't understand security. But again, they keep sifting them in, and there they are. You got someone else who's there. I think the first director or the CEO for the SIA, he was a skin doctor or something, wasn't he? How's that work?
Well, Ian was an ex-paramedic, wasn't he? I think.
Yeah. Well, the other guy. Let's talk about him. I made many arguments with that gentleman. So there you go.
Can I just as a sort of thing? One of the things that is sort of talking about. We've got to start sticking up for the industry along the lines of saying we've got to start spreading, in my opinion, a narrative that explains to people that when they go out, they're going out into an adult environment. It is their decision whether how much they drink, if they stuff drugs down their thing. That is a personal decision that the end user, customer, whatever you call it. There is nothing that I can do if somebody decides to do that. I can do a certain amount, but I can't make them stop. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. We're not a creche, and that is the thing.
When we were having, I at the IOL, I did a head-to-head with Ian Graham, who is the head of central licensing for the Met. Yeah. And I said, at what point are we going to consider individual accountability?
Yeah.
So, let's spin it this way. If every time someone got drunk and disorderly, they were fined £100, or someone who took drugs and needed an ambulance to get home, or, separate to typical medical environments, would that change the narrative around alcohol and the presence of mind not to go too far? And throw the narrative a different way. And now, while we appreciate that serving someone that's intoxicated is still a relevant position, as far as I'm concerned, there is no accountability on the individual. It's businesses that are at risk for individuals' decision to go too far. And it was quite interesting that the police were like, well, actually, that's a good shout. The problem you have is getting something like that through is when you're talking about votes and people, that's the challenge. But, our industry is definitely suffering from the culpability of individuals making that decision to go too far.
Well, I appreciate, look, again, I'm well aware of the time, and I know you've got to be like a million different places with everything that you've got to do. I'm just going to say a couple of words, and then because Gary's heard it all, because he obviously turned off my ears at some point. But I just want to say thanks for coming on, Mike. Really appreciated it. It's been the bits that I heard, and I did hear quite a bit. I really, really appreciated. And so I've got two things to ask you, as I always do. Is firstly, please get rid of doorman. Let's stop calling people doorman, bouncers, etc. Start making the change, because we can do that, especially with people like you. Guest safety officers. It sounds better. We have guest safety officers on our door, rather like the yellow jackets, for the police. Let's change it. That's simple. We can start doing that straight away. And continue do what you're doing. Cheers, mate.
Thank you. And thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. It's been great to be able to talk and just let loose a bit some of the things that have been going on. So,
well, Gary, it's down to you. It's your show now.
It is my show, and I'll go round up. It was great to have you on, Mike. And we'd love to have you back as well, please, because there's so much we've missed out, and we could have gone on so deeper. There's many things which we could discuss and point out. Just to recap, really, on the things. At the end of the day, we come to terms with the understanding that the legislation is very much out of date. Our regulator is a toothless tiger, and training really is not very good, which we've established that in many programs. So on those little points, there is a future. We're all here. We're all trying to do something and change it. The nightside economy, ourselves, and if we could just start trying to get people together and involved, maybe we might be able to lobby a little bit more. I know you're out there doing it, Mike, and we really appreciate all the hard work you put in there, especially over the last few years. You've done an excellent job. I'm not going to blow your horn and trumpet anymore, but there's a lot of people have said to me, Michael's done an excellent job, and I'd just like to say thank you on all those people as well. On my final notes there, I'd like to thank Ian for being here today and doing his bits and loosening comms. And I'd like to say
it's sabotaged by you.
Yeah, of course it is. And again, a big thank you to Michael Kill.
No,
thanks, Mike.
Thank you both, and thank you, Ian, for your continuous sort of push on my side as well. It makes me think on all sides of the coin, and I know myself and Gary speak outside of this, but it'd be great to, and hopefully you'll be able to come down at the conference towards the end of this week. And
I'm there. I'm booked in, mate. I'm gonna be there. I've signed in. Guest. I'm on the guest list. I'm in. I'm coming specifically to see you talk about the economic situation and to heckle Alistair Turnham.
I would expect nothing less.